So I'm here with Harry and Gabe. Harry and I had a conversation last week, which was the first one we've had. I've known Harry probably about 2 years, and we had a break in our communication, but reconnected recently. And his talk, I think, was very enlightening because it really reveals somebody. Harry isn't in sobriety. He's not a sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous like many of the people who are on this recording or in these recordings, but he had an experience, and a friend of mine who is sober sent him to me. It was about 2 years ago, wasn't it, Harry?
Yes, 2 years ago, 2022, yes.
Yeah,
June
so
2020.
we had several conversations when he was in pretty bad shape mentally, but the disease is not limited to alcoholics and drug addicts. They are just probably the best obvious example of people struggling with compulsions as a result of obsessive thinking. And I would suggest that compulsions are always based on obsessive thinking. They're always an attempt to escape into something other than what we're doing, trying to get it out of ourself, thinking that all we are is what we think. And so that feeling stuck in our thought, we want to try to escape that mental anguish. So in terms of our conversation, something I think is worth mentioning is that there's nothing theoretical, complicated, or impractical about beginning to consider that reality is real and truth is true, just as a baseline for understanding life and understanding our role in life and our possibilities in life. To notice this, to begin to consider this, is also to begin to see with clarity how impractical the theoretical, obsessed, extraordinarily complicated ideas that we create, thinking we create our own reality and truth, because they're unmasked. As I see clearly about what's happening, I all of a sudden see clearly what I'm doing that actually isn't happening, but I'm thinking obsessively is all that's happening, which I would say is a mentally obsessed state of thinking, not a state of mind. Because the actual state of mind would be a knowing presence, a knowing awareness, an absolute state that doesn't change simply because we think our thinking changes it. So when we get better at feeling what is worse, meaning I have the clarity to now begin to notice that I have sensations in my body that don't feel good. And I would suggest that those sensations are accurately feeling thoughts that aren't good and that are worse than could be better. And seeing worse is getting better at feeling well, because it's starting to align what my feeling is about, offering me perspective on how I'm thinking with what's actually happening. So well-being is our nature as beings. And if I'm expressing my seeming reality is only what I think, then I think I become a characterization of a personality that's based only in thought. And certainly that characterization and that personality would be less than an absolute state of being that knows it knows and is aware that it's aware, which I would say is the most practical and simple thing because it doesn't change. My thinking changes all the time. The absolute state of this knowing awareness, if it's omniscient and omnipotent and all those things that have been discussed through history, then it doesn't change. And that simplicity of it is the baseline, the substance of what a lie doesn't have. A lie creates an effect. A lie disturbs us. Maintaining a lie requires constant attention, obsessive attention, to make believe that obsessively attending to it gives it life, gives it reality. And yet with that comes this feeling of being afraid for our life and afraid of other people's thoughts and afraid of being alone and afraid of being separate, when in fact it's the feeling of the thoughts that we're feeling that are alone and separate. So to imagine that what we make up in reality and truth is real and truth is to imagine that misunderstanding is our understanding. It's starting to see that our understanding has actually been a misunderstanding and our perception has been misperception. And our mistaken identity has been a personality characterized by different definitions of who we think we are that often seem to be something we need to constantly work on to try to become those things, when in fact we'll never be those things because we already are as we are in absolute reality, in absolute truth, within the context of that, whatever that means. I don't know that describing it any further than in the simplest way would do any good, other than to suggest that if it is real and if it's true, we would all know what that is by a present state of awareness that would be very stable and very confirming of the actions we take on that thinking that comes from it, that intuitive wisdom that comes out of that awareness. So lies continue only as long as the thinker of them maintains them. And obsessive thinking is trying to maintain lies. So whenever I'm disturbed, I know in my experience, whenever I feel that inner conflict, I know that I'm maintaining a lie. What that means is I'm maintaining a thought that isn't true that I think is true. And that also includes thoughts I think I'm not thinking. Because the impact, we normally often think of lies as being deliberately told to protect us from something or save us from something in some way or another. People find out it would make things worse for us. So we lie to try to put ourselves in a better position. But if the position I'm putting myself in is the idea that all I've become is what I think, I couldn't be in a worse position because it's no position at all. And that imposition is depressing. The longer I maintain those thoughts, the longer I think that I have no option, the longer I think I'm not doing it, the longer I think there's nothing I'm doing. And as a result, there's nothing I can do about what's happening. So again, the lie is fulfilled by more lying, more lying, more lying. That's the complication. Life is not complicated. It is simple. What we think of it is complicated when we think life becomes only what we think. So to see this distinction there is to start to say, oh, or consider that there's an absolute knowing that we already know, we all share, we all have. And if we talk in those terms, by applying those terms, the confirmation of those terms would become more and more obvious with each other, because they don't always seem obvious when we're thinking about it alone, and trying to fix it alone is the idea that we're alone fixing it, rather than see that the actual engagement is what we're designed to do here. Cooperation with other humans, cooperation with people, cooperation with groups, with whatever, anyone nearby, would be somewhat indicative of a potential to function at a level that would be both complementary to our own experience and also others immediately. So the benefit to anything real and true is a benefit for everyone because we all share it. So there's nothing I can say that you should do or can do that you can decide you don't want anything to do with. Nothing. So I don't tell you what to think. I'm not interested in telling you what to think. I'm simply sharing my experience with the confidence of my experience in relation to having been through this process and noticing that I made a mess of things as long as I thought of them as a mess, as long as I thought of them backward, as long as I thought that a lie could become true. I looked at things backward and thought that misunderstanding was in fact understanding, and thought that misperception was perception, and thought that my thinking was in fact reality. And all I needed to do was think a little harder, a little longer, a little more, and somehow one day it would just magically become true. And fantasy as reality is effectively insanity. So we don't struggle with reality, we struggle with mental insanity that's imposed, induced, and that's all we're talking about here. We're not talking about insanity of any other form, if there are any. I don't know that there are. My suspicion is if this has been thought of this way as long as humans have been killing each other in the name of thoughts, that it may be a pandemic and endemic to our entire species, and something that we just simply haven't addressed correctly, just the same way we thought the world was flat and that the horizon meant doom, and nobody sailed near the horizon and missed all the opportunity to find all that was beyond it, which never left because we thought it wasn't there. It simply wasn't observed because we didn't go there. We didn't approach it. We didn't say, oh, maybe there's more. Maybe there's more to what we're thinking. So that may be a little longer introduction, but it's a baseline for the conversation. Good morning, gentlemen.
Done and done.
So Harry, Gabe and I walk weekly, have a cup of coffee and take a walk on the beach weekly and talk about this. Occasionally other people come and go. This conversation I've tried to narrow down to people interested in it rather than people who come and think they're going to get their questions answered so they can go back out and just continue to maintain that same form of thinking.
Yeah.
And so I'm doing what I can, knowing that there's nothing I can ultimately do to induce people's interest. But my sense is pain, as the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous says, pain is the touchstone of spiritual growth. And if that's the case, it would say to me, if I have any clarity, that it seems as though we're not willing to notice what's happening until we really hurt and until we're really in trouble. And then all of a sudden we become willing, which means to me that I am willing to deny, to fight, to oppose, to charge my thinking with an opposition to reality and make believe that somehow that charge will eventually overcome reality, and act insanely in the meantime, thinking it's the only thing to do and being offended by anybody who thinks anything other than that. So here we are.
I went to another dinner party, Jack, last night, a much more festive one, and some friends were there, so I didn't feel, it was more like a friends and family thing, so I didn't feel the banality of the conversations. They were all very, and it was part of my professional stuff too, so we were all just talking shop and talking old projects and other things, but it was nice. It was a nice get together. So I didn't feel those same feelings of being trapped in absurd conversations.
Yeah.
So it was better.
I think when there's a basis for a conversation that's functional, it's about doing things better, working, developing, it feels right. Versus the kind of backslapping and everything's, storytelling and all that stuff that for me can feel very awkward.
Yeah, there was no storytelling last night. That was an interesting point there. I'm sure there was, but I wasn't part of those conversations.
Yeah.
It was also a celebration of some high school graduations, so a lot of younger people were there, which tends to, I think, lessen they're just being youthful teenagers.
Yeah.
So, but it was fun. It's good.
Yeah, it's that time of the year.
Dad's
It's good. I heard a Jesuit priest once said, I think Herb Kagan mentioned this, that he said he stopped reading when he started listening to people. And I thought that was good.
Yeah, I think you mentioned that last week. Yeah. Like I said before, 2 years ago, I just didn't like talking to people. I just wanted to be in my mind by myself in my room. But then after this, I became like very open. I like being around people. I like talking to them. I just like being with them. It just feels very different.
Isn't it funny to think that there's 8.5 billion people and it's even possible to be alone?
Yeah.
It kind of shows that we take these ideas we have and seem to make them true by thinking we can even be alone and disconnected, when in fact we're never alone and we're never disconnected if we're seamlessly part of an absolute state of being of any sort, whatever that would be.
Mm-hmm.
So my sense is feeling alone is feeling a thought that has no basis, has no denominator, like in mathematics. If the denominator is zero, it doesn't matter how big you make the numerator, it's zero. It adds up to absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
So the listening changes too, Gabe, in relation to the, letting people go a little bit is, that's not something I've always been very good at all. My granddaughter says that she says she doesn't like talking to me because I always offer her insight into life that she's not interested in. So I say, well, so all you want from me is not what I do? And you think that's the best I can give you?
Yeah.
But, at 13, she's got ideas. So one of the things that I think you and I have been crossing over this threshold is to start to notice, in a transition of beginning to even suggest that reality is reality and it doesn't take our thinking to be real, is to relieve a lot of the thinking that we've been doing about reality and about what we think is reality to try and make it reality rather than just start noticing things and witnessing things and noticing that we're really observers. That's our essence, is to observe. We're watching all the time. We're monitoring all the time. Our bodies are designed to do that exactly. They're just filled with sensations, 30 some miles of nerves, sensing things. Not just our five senses. There's many, many more senses than the five we talk about that are obvious, including the sixth sense, which is supposed to be this sort of perceptive capacity that we have. And I would suggest that it probably is, but it's probably, as the sixth sense, it's probably all the senses combined, like a knowing sense, which would be an awareness. And starting to see those things is also feeling those things that we see. So if those things are filled with fear, feeling the fear would come naturally with looking at it honestly, because we're actually beginning to look at the symptomatic, somatic, bodily sensations that we've been trying to run from by thinking we can keep away from them, by not thinking about them and by feeling better about doing something else and by distracting ourselves with all kinds of other things. And they can be subtle things. They don't have to be heroin or alcohol or drugs. It doesn't have to be something that severe to be a compulsion that's constantly trying to take our attention away, distracting us from this attractive nuisance that we've created in our own, that we continue to maintain in our own thinking.
Well, the thing that got me yesterday was that quote, I don't know who you attributed it to, of walking backwards to the future.
Yeah. Aristotle, I think Socrates were, some of the early great thinkers who really looked at what was happening. And I mean, think of Aristotle creating the concept of an atom. When he did, there was no microscopes or telescopes, as far as I know.
Right.
And he got that there was an essence, that at some level there was an essence. And now even the atom is large compared to some of the other essential characteristics that have been looked at. But the fact that he even got that was a good indication that he was seeing in an intuitive, wise way, knowing way to even grasp that. So that was what he said, is that it's like we walk backwards through life, not seeing what's coming, constantly running into it, but seeing the effects of what we run into. Which is interesting because if we have a knowing sense, and the obsessive thinking has always thought that all we should ever get and all that should ever happen, which would be expectations, is what we thought would happen. And we've always found that what actually happens is very seldom what we thought should or would happen. Then maybe acting in a more intuitive, expressing a more intuitive sense would start to also value the variations of occurrences that occur as a learning curve, a curriculum of our process of noticing reality and beginning to assimilate how things actually work rather than how we think they should work to satisfy the impulses we have, try and get something we want for some immediate gratification, and start to be gratified by the process that's occurring as an actual instructive manual for life, this life experience we're having. How do we function on this earth? How do we make the best of situations without overusing them and dominating them and completely using them until they can't sustain in the face of our overuse of them? How do we complement nature? How do we become a part of each other's lives that's beneficial, useful, as the book says, usefully whole?
You got me. I don't know.
Well, let's say it probably isn't in the dysfunctional thinking of obsessive thought, in the reactive, impulsive behaviors that we would. I mean, let's just take that and say if that was a baseline, that's probably not the best source of that answer. Right?
Yeah, that, I don't know I forget what the math term is, but by ruling out the negatives, you come to the solution.
Yeah. Well, so what would be left? I mean, if dysfunctional thinking is based on lies, what would be left?
Death and functional thinking.
Well, truth, maybe. Reality. In the real sense, not in the thought sense, but in an essence that's absolutely essential. The reality that existed before any of us started thinking, before humans started thinking.
But when I'm in those thoughts, those dysfunctional thoughts, they are larger than the universe, literally larger than the universe.
Well, think of your words. You're in them.
Yeah.
Because you think they're real.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the seeming blindness that occurs is literally as you described. When I get into the bubble of that thought, I literally think the limit of that thought is in fact the end of my life. Just like my sense is the guys who looked at the horizon and said that passing the horizon would cause doom were actually witnessing the doom of the horizon of their own limited thinking. They knew there was doom involved, but they assigned it to something else, which I have always done. If I was taking credit for what I was doing wrong, I wouldn't continue doing the wrong in the same way I did when I thought I wasn't doing it. Right?
Yeah, I guess I was saying the scale of it too is also disproportionate.
Yeah. Well, you really feel you're engulfed, completely consumed, entirely intoxicated with the idea, right?
Yeah.
So how do you tend to get there, Gabe? What occurs?
Yeah, the start of a thought, the synapse is firing on a thought that isn't true.
But what's the circumstance that tends to trigger those?
Oh, for me personally, it's very much about me doing something wrong, me being attacked or saying I did something unprofessional or something wrong, or
Right.
and that those circumstances will lead to the loss of family and house and job and what I perceive myself to be, I guess is what you're saying. But
Right. And you can see the disproportionate leap. It starts with a thought that is simple as having it or not having it, and then it leads to complete cataclysmic end of your whole family and everything that you have anything to do with.
within seconds.
Yeah. Well, probably less.
Milliseconds. Yes.
I think it's really, my sense is my experience is it's actually just exposing something that's ongoing because that obsessive thinking is constantly grinding in the back. It's like a computer that can't reboot. And in the background, it's just churning and churning and churning, and the what do you call it? The hard drive is heating up as it's using more and more energy to try to keep itself going. But there's no possibility without rebooting it for it to actually correct itself and put things back into order.
Right. Yeah.
My experience, Gabe, is that those circumstances are the ones that I make believe won't happen because I've isolated myself in a thought that isn't true. I'm in a thought of fantasy, imagining that make believe is my only reality. And one of those beliefs is none of those things I'm afraid of can possibly happen. And I'm going to insulate myself from thinking about those things. And you hear people say this, well, that's negative thing. You're thinking negatively. You're going to manifest those things. No. Everything's always possible. It's not because I think of them that I'll manifest them. Often it's because I think they're not going to happen that they're manifest to give me a chance to break the bubble because I want to. I want to manifest those problems to actually get out from under this thing I don't seem to actually have any perspective in. I'm actually at a greater level causing it to happen. But it's generally the limit of an idea I have that of an expectation. When I began to expect that what happens, when things happen that I don't expect to happen in those other ways, because I'm thinking that what I'd like is to go to my car and get into it and have it start, but I go to my car and I get into it and it won't start, all of a sudden that just becomes a thing that can happen within the context of everything that can happen. And it's not as loaded as thinking it's the only thing that should happen. And now all of a sudden my day is ruined and my life is screwed and everything I've done is wrong. And my whole history becomes, my life passes before me and all these idiotic things that I've done in the past.
Well, let's dig into that a little deeper, Jack. I used to have those same feelings you described when a glass of milk would spill.
Right.
As
How old were you?
As a child, but also up until very recently, like say 5-10 years ago, it would literally ruin my day. My life is shit. And, the milk spilled or, something scratched the paint on my house or, whatever, like the trash can lid got broken, like it would just, whatever those minutia things happen, just, tear down my entire day.
So if you think there's something to dig into here, let's just simply look at the surface and forget about the idea that there's anything other than where we are right now. You follow me?
Yeah.
The idea that we're digging is another thought coming from the idea that what's happening is happening somewhere else and never here. We're going to dig to
but
get
I was
to
saying,
it.
yeah, I understand. I was just saying that sort of just came to me that I used to have those same feelings you just described. And they weren't attacks on my personal character or my professional diligence. They were just something that didn't go exactly right as I had planned and wanted it to.
Exactly. So here's a thought. As I've come to see that my actual intention is actually what happens, not what I think should happen. Because if I have a greater interest in being and actually existing at a level that's functional, that allows me the capacity of my functional capacity, rather than the simple limitations of the ideas I have about how or why, how I can overcome dysfunction to finally have a little of something more than I have now. I started to notice that the intention was, in fact, exactly what was happening. And I noticed also in that the responsibility is starting to see that if I'm responsible by nature, not as an option, I'm not giving or taking responsibility because I'm admitting it within my thinking. I'm simply responsible because I exist, period. 100% for everything. The second thought was, well, so too then is everyone else. So I don't bear this burden alone. I share it with everyone. And again, it shows that unity is the source of this obsessive or the absolute nature of existence. But if I am doing that, I am also interested in learning how to navigate this experience I'm having in this relative human domain, seemingly, that could seem to be all that I have, when in fact it's something I have, and thoughts are something I have within that something I have, whatever that human experience is. That it's actually a willingness to start to learn from that versus thinking of it as something that shouldn't be happening. And once again, go back to that root of, I don't have anything to do with this. And as a result, I can't do anything about it. And as a result, everything that's happening is completely happening to me rather than being caused by me.
That thought never crossed my mind during those times.
Now, think also, Gabe, of we've got into this the other day, and I know that we talked about it 2 weeks ago. Maybe it was last week, Sunday. But this disproportionate idea, if I am taking a lie and making believe it's true, what could be more disproportionate than to think that something with no denominator, no substance whatsoever, so I'm taking absolutely nothing, something that doesn't exist, and turning it into everything that exists, reality, truth. If that's the fundamental idea of who I am, then wouldn't I naturally jump to those same extreme conclusions to engulf everything I think I have and everything I think I am in the fire, in the incendiary fire I create, in imagining anything that's wrong? Anything now becomes a threat. Anything wrong becomes a threat to the wrong thought I'm having. Because I need to promote an image that's absolutely impenetrable. Why wouldn't I feel alone? I've completely thought I'm isolated from reality. This isn't just isolated from reality as though I'm in reality and isolated from it. This is non-existence. This is, I don't even have any place whatsoever in any of it. Nothing. And then the absurdity of those extreme positions, if you're looking at them, and all of a sudden saying, wow, now I'm seeing clearly exactly what I'm doing, because the root of it is this idea that I'm the creator of reality. And as a result, all I am is what I think. And I need to maintain my thinking at all costs and make it right all the time, when in fact, most of it is wrong, because I've never related to reality. I've been relating to a reality that doesn't exist. Trying to make it right. Huh?
Yeah, that was me. I just like I think I told you I started skating a few weeks ago again, and then I actually scratched my because I like everything to be perfect, and it just scratched my skateboard, and that just kind of like ruined it just ruins my day, because I want everything I want my skateboard to be perfect, and then I went to work. I was just thinking about my skateboard, thinking about the scratch. And I was like, wait, I'm actually stuck in my head again. But I actually accepted that I scratched my skateboard, and I think it just, all this anxiety just went away. And I'm like, you know what, this is what happened, and I accept it, and then it just goes away. But if I actually get in my head and I start thinking about, what if I didn't do this? What if I didn't scratch my board? And then I start thinking all over again. I know what I was doing. I was wrong. So I actually accepted that I scratched my board. I actually looked at the because it's just hard for me to describe it. I always wanted everything to be perfect. My car to be perfect. My everything to be perfect. Anything that would happen to my life, that was anything that happened that I didn't like, I would just make it perfect in my mind. But I was just very. But at some point, I just didn't like being in my mind anymore. It just my body didn't like it, because I would feel very anxious, and it's just like I. I don't like that feeling anymore. It just I like being here. I like being. It just sometimes when I get very anxious, my mind, my body doesn't want it. I don't want it, and just by not wanting it, it makes me more anxious.
Yeah. Well, if we're responsible by nature, getting back to that point about intention, we're responsible by nature. We want everything we're doing. So when I think I don't want it, it's a revealing I'm trying to be irresponsible for what I'm doing. It's telling me that not wanting it is me in my thinking, the me I think I am in my thinking, telling me that I have nothing to do with it. So I don't want it. Of course I don't want it, because it doesn't live up to what I thought the original thought was I've created reality, nothing, anything that scratches the surface of that has now impaired my ability to function. I am decimated by that. So you're describing in your idea of perfection exactly what Gabe's describing in his idea of being overwhelmed by anything that doesn't meet that standard of impenetrability, that idea that he is alone, he's in a bubble, and anybody who scratches that surface is putting that bubble at risk. What's interesting about bubbles is you can hit them with a bat and they don't pop, but if you touch them with a needle, they're gone. So the smallest point that's accurate actually eliminates the bubble. While the bat, you can beat yourself up, you can self-abuse, you can do all that stuff forever, and it's never going to pop. It's going to maintain it. It's going to continue. You're maintaining it by thinking you can resist it, by thinking there's something to resist. There's nothing there being thought of as being there. So Gabe, to your point, what I'm hearing is that perfection is the idea that our thoughts have to be perfect because we know that reality is in fact perfect. It's already perfect. Why is it perfect? It never changes. We can do anything to it. We can scratch it. We can claim it isn't real. We can fight it. We can live as though it's not real. We can lie. We can cheat. We can steal. We can be. It does not change, period. It's real. Life is life. All of these possibilities we're experiencing in our universe are all based on an essence that doesn't change. And if that's our basis, and we begin to remind our thinking of that, literally remind, meaning the mind is now remembered because it's been dismembered in our thought, is to actually begin to align with and consider that the alignment, like you're saying, Harry, that you're accepting that the scratch is there. Well, the scratch is there whether you accept it or not. I mean, here's the ultimate freedom, right?
Yes. But the thing is that I was so used to
fighting.
I was so used to thinking about what if I didn't do this,
right.
And then I would actually it just relive my whole life again in my mind. It just what if I go back? What if I go back?
That thought is what if I didn't do this? Is the thought is of I didn't have anything to do with this.
Mm-hmm.
When in fact you had everything to do with it. And all you're doing now is trying to pretend you had nothing to do with it. And it's exactly the idea that we think because we're not thinking what we're thinking, that what's happening has nothing to do with us.
Yeah.
So if I can put my thinking to sleep to make believe I'm not doing what I'm doing and then live wondering why everything keeps happening to me that seems bad and it always recurs, I'm literally creating the occurrence to get my attention to finally say, wait a minute, I must be at the center of this. I'm actually begging and pleading with all these cries for help that I'm suffering from to get my own attention.
Yeah. True. Yeah. Even in my mind, when I actually when I pretended to actually not do it, like I would just get a different outcome. I would just okay for a little bit for a few minutes, and then my mind goes like, what if instead of this outcome we actually something different happened, and then it would just be stuck in my head all day, not even minutes, hours, and then it never ends because there's so many outcomes, and then.
You're almost saying exactly what Gabe is saying with different circumstances, different times, different places, different images, but the same impossibility that any suggestion of wrong begins to develop all sorts of wrongs.
Yes, but now, and I'm actually aware of it. I actually put a stop. I actually stop it. I'm kind of like training my mind to not do that. Because I know if I do it, I become very anxious. And then I'm actually, before that, I get really stressed out.
Yeah.
And then it becomes anxious, and then I get very, I usually go for a walk. I just, or just go skate or do something. Because I know, I know what's going to happen.
Yeah. So one of the things I want to work with you on, and I think you're interested, so I'm going to suggest this now, which can seem confrontive because I know when I had a bundle of thoughts that I thought were working for me, I was very protective of those thoughts because I'd always been protective of the wrong thoughts. When I started getting slightly better thoughts, I thought I had to hang on to them even more than I hung on to the worst thoughts, which I'd hung on to for decades, right? As long as I think that thing is actually there and real, I think I need to do something about it. And as I began to realize that it was just fantasy, it was literally illusion being taken so seriously as to be reality, I realized that the more time I spent trying to maintain it and manage it, the more time I was spending maintaining and managing the idea that it had existence of its own, that it literally lived and had life, and it doesn't. That took, as Gabe has witnessed, starting to look at that can be very depressing. Not because what you're looking at is you're starting to see what has been depressing all along throughout this repetitive cycle.
Mm-hmm.
Not something that it's new in the sense that every moment is new, but it's a repetition of this chronic maintaining it. Like you're saying, how do I stop it? How do I stop it? How do I stop it? If you're focused on stopping it all the time and not looking at the fact that you keep restarting it, you'll always have a job to do to feel better about it, but you'll never see it dissolve completely because you'll be maintaining it as though it's really there, as though there's something to maintain. So I want to engage in that discussion, and I don't want to take anything you're doing, Harry, that works, use it, utilize it. But in your experience of it, just notice that maybe in the limits of these attempts we make to fix and do things, they're limited by whatever we think is right in the moment. They're just limited by the ideas we have. And if there's anything unlimited that actually exists, a knowing nature, an absolute knowing nature, an absolute knowing awareness that is the basis of the entire universe. When I began to consider that was my nature, not all the ideas I had about nature, and not all the ideas.
Hey, Jack, I would also like to add that I've made $1 million from this program. It's not just about what you're saying. It's like it's actually paid off for me, Harry.
So, Anthony, given that you just stepped in here.
Hey, this actually makes money, Harry. I've made $1 million from this. It sounds like a cult, but it actually makes money.
So that's the least of the benefit. The ultimate benefit is peace of mind and a sense of no matter what you have or don't have, that there's an absolute stability in the universe that is your stability, that is our stability. It's not just yours, it's not just mine, it's ours, all of ours, everyone, everywhere, everything, everywhere.
And it's possible to thrive on chaos. You don't have to have stability to be happy.
I would suggest that we are stable.
I know, but chaos is even better. Like chaos is good too, right? You always preach.
So I want to continue with you, Harry. To consider these things in an absolute sense is to begin to notice that reality it's like the scratch on the skateboard, or the circumstances surrounding the phone call you got recently, Gabe, that triggered that, oh no, what's wrong? It's a tiny little event that becomes seems to be everything.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? It becomes everything because we really believe it's reality. And to not do it a little bit brings great relief. But if the relief it brings also leaves the impression that we need to maintain this new smaller bubble that we're in, or the bigger bubble that we've created, we're still in the bubble. We're still doing the thing that causes the ideas that we're separate from it. And the problem isn't the bubble, because I can be in a bubble as many times as I want all day long, knowing it's a bubble, knowing I created it, knowing I can undo it as quickly as I did it. It's when I think it's right and I don't think I'm doing it that I struggle. That seeming subconscious is where I keep these things that I don't want to claim responsibility for, that I think I'm keeping secret. You described it by talking about the things you put under the carpet.
Yeah.
You think if you don't see them, they're not there, but every once in a while you want to take a peek to remember they're there.
Yes.
This conversation is about taking a peek at that area that we call our subconscious that we don't think we have any control over. And I started to notice that's exactly where I keep all the lies I don't want to claim responsibility for. It's how I'd always dealt with it. I always pretended it wasn't me. And if the lies were justified because somebody did something that I thought then justified me to do it, it was still something that was cloaked in all kinds of thoughts of justification and rationalization to make what was wrong seem right. If I'm working on what's wrong as wrong, it is right. If I'm looking at what's wrong as right, I'm creating a conflict that seems like it will go on, as you described, forever, because I'm so committed to continuing to maintain it, and at the same time claim I have nothing to do with it. That's how it gets perpetuated. So to see if there's an absolute nature, in my experience, when I said, I'm doing it all, my whole perception is contaminated. Everything I see in the world is contaminated when I look at it as though it's how I see it, rather than see it as something that may have more to it than what I think. And when I started seeing that, just like the day I thought, maybe I got a drinking problem, and I'm not going to talk myself out of it, and there's people that might be able to help me. And the longer I pretend I don't have this problem, the longer I'm going to continue to maintain the problem in the name of thinking there's nothing anybody can do for me. Versus seeing that bubble and saying, oh, I can create the bubble. I can live in the bubble. But when I create it and live in it,
okay, Jack, Harry's talking
about
wanting to kill himself, not talking about the bubble. Or it's like, this is life or death. Right, Harry? It's not like a bubble fantasy. It's like life or death. Harry wants to kill himself sometimes.
Is that your experience, Anthony?
Yeah. Hello. It's like you're the only thing that saves my life.
Well, I'm not. It's what you've done with anything you've heard that it's your alignment with it, not mine.
No, listen, don't tell me. Listen, you're saving my life. I don't want to hear you saying like, no, I'm not. Like, you're saving my life, bro.
Okay, that's
like that's the people that I want. Like, unless like, you know what I mean? Like, why even talk to? Unless Harry is like, okay, I've tried everything else. You know what I mean? Like, nothing fucking works. I'm ready. Like, that's who we want. Are you there, Harry, or no?
Yeah, I'm here.
Right? No, not you're here. I'm saying, like, are you looking at the, like, you've tried everything else, nothing else works.
Anthony,
like, well, okay, I'll try.
You don't need Harry's vote to have your experience. You're explaining your thinking right now. You're explaining your thinking, not Harry's. So this is a present conversation looking at what's happening presently, not what you think is going on with Harry. You're sharing your experience. Harry's here to share his experience. Same with Gabe. So what I've learned, I can never, ever say anything well enough for anyone else to assimilate it while thinking they don't want anything to do with it. Because each of us have the pure, absolute potential to make decisions about what we think. And think those decisions that we make become reality rather than simply are conclusive for as long as we want them to be conclusive. When in fact,
right. But can we get paid for doing that? That's what I want to know.
Well, whatever you get paid, Anthony, is never enough. So I would say you're on
right. Yeah, exactly.
But you're on a compulsive bender.
Let's make this like a 15-minute show. What is this show about?
Anthony, you're on a compulsive bender, ignoring the obsessive nature of your thinking, and you're the only one, I can't do it for you, that can look at it honestly and begin to assess it accurately so as to dissolve it rather than constantly come up with new resolutions that seem to have to do for you with money all the time. Nothing I can do about that at all. But if we share something, and I mentioned we share a knowing nature, and we have that knowing nature, if we talk about that knowing nature collectively, we will probably confirm each other's experience rather than argue over what they should be or shouldn't be thinking or experiencing. Because that nature, if it's natural, would be all of our nature. And to mention it, just like standing on Earth and gravity, if we thought we were going to fly away all the time and somebody said, you know, if you don't believe certain things, your feet are going to leave the ground and you're going to be up in space and never be able to come back. That would mean thinking a lot about that weighty thought to keep our gravity, to keep our feet on the ground, when in fact, gravity does what gravity does. So much so that I never wonder in the morning whether my feet are going to hit the ground when I wake up and get out of bed.
Yeah, well, if I had a house like yours that has a built-in like waterfall, that's easy to say.
Well, I started saying this well before I had the house with the waterfall. So I'm not diminishing the functional capacity, I'm actually accenting it. But the functional capacity doesn't come with a new commitment to dysfunctional capacity as sort of an end to the means.
Obviously, you've never like wanted to kill yourself. When you're like talking like this, like you know what I mean. When you want to kill yourself, you're like, okay, I'm gonna fucking do it. It's not like there's no. You're like talking about like, well, logically, you know what I mean. You
So
have
Anthony, again, you're sharing your experience with us.
Yeah, is that a problem that I'm sharing my experience?
No, it's only a problem when you're talking about it as being my experience.
Right, but I want to share Jack's experience too with him. Like, you know what I mean?
Well, if you're listening and we have an absolute nature, we already share it, which is what I just got done talking about.
Yeah, well, what if I don't
And
like
by the
that?
way, Harry, that nature, Harry's relatively new to this conversation, Anthony. We've been in touch a couple of years, but I've been out of touch with him for a while. He's had some things go on, but he's also learned and grown and developed and has his own experience about this. And if we have a basis that's shared, that's absolutely abundant and unlimited, then that basis would certainly not create scarcity and a limitation on our ability to function in ways that would be brilliantly productive and abundant. I mean, well beyond the limitations of what we talk about today in terms of wealth and all that kind of satisfaction.
Yeah, well, if I was as good looking as Harry, I wouldn't have all the problems that I have today.
So you think? So that's another story you use to justify you being distinct and separate and having problems and woes you need to overcome. So we're not.
Well, I am distinct. Nobody has the same fingerprint as me, right? So I am distinct and separate.
Only in your thinking, Anthony. Only in
no.
I'm
like. Is there anybody else that's me? No.
Okay. So given that, if we speak to that as our experience, that would be one thing you could actually rely on without trying to presume it was
Hello.
anyone
That's
else's.
what I'm saying. That's all that I have.
Okay. Well, I wouldn't say it's all that you have. It's all that you think you have. And if thinking is something we have, it's simply something we do. And if there's an essence that we just are, that isn't about having and it's about not having. It's about neither.
Have you ever kissed a guy before? Let a guy kiss you before?
I'd rather stick to the point.
That's a yes.
No, I'd rather stick to the point. I'm not interested.
That's easy. Harry, what's up? Cult-free zone. The cult. This is kind of a cult, right? Jack, is this a cult or no?
Anthony, I'm going to leave it to you to come up with those conclusions.
It's a cult. Otherwise, if it's not a cult, then I'm fucking wasting it. Let's do a cult, right? What if Harry is the leader? What if it's not really Jack? What if Harry is the leader? The guy that says nothing is like, yeah. Why are you here, Harry?
What is it?
Why are you here?
Well, I'm just here to share my experience.
Okay, we'll start sharing. Let's hear your experience. What is your experience?
Anthony, you came in 40 minutes late. Harry's been sharing the whole time, or quite a bit of the time. So I want you to maybe notice how presumptive you are in the expectations you have about what should be happening here, rather than just allow what's happening to be happening and start to notice there may be some benefit beyond the expectation and demands you had in coming to get what you thought you wanted and what you thought we should be giving you.
And what if I don't need that? Like, I'm like, oh yeah, if I had all that, okay. But what if I don't even need that?
Why would you come? Why would you come? Why would you be here? What interest do you have in being here, knowing what we talk about, if you didn't have some interest in what we're talking about? If you needed to come here just to profess all of your independence, why not stay independent and not come?
Because I have to be the opposite of everything. Like if I didn't exist, the mirror would be like, well, fuck, I have nothing to do, right? Like the mirror, the only person that loves me right now is the mirror. He's like, well, if you don't come
If you
anymore,
didn't exist, you wouldn't be thinking about it. So that's resolved. That's over. That's past in terms of something that's happened.
Is this a cult? That's what I'm saying. Is this a cult?
I'm going to let you make a decision as to what you want to think.
I say yes, dude. I want it to be a cult. Like I'm Harry. Like I didn't want it to be a cult until I met Harry. He's like so quiet. You know what I mean? Like Harry is like the ultimate non-leader of our cult.
Anthony, do you notice at all how obsessive you are in your thinking and how intrusive that thinking can become in an environment that's actually looking to talk about dissolving rather than reinforcing that? Do you get that at all? Does that partially occur to you at all?
Not at all. Not even like I don't even hear you.
Okay, so in the minutes before you came today, we were talking about the blindness, the seeming blindness that we have, that we don't even see what we're doing while we're doing what we're doing and thinking it's happening to us. And as a result, presuming that everyone else is thinking what we're thinking and they need us to absolutely suggest to them. We each become the source of their satisfaction, when in fact that's not the case at all. The source of reality.
What if I'm really Harry? What if I'm really Harry? Like I'm like, fuck, Harry is really.
What if you're not? You just identified yourself as your thoughts and your experience. So why don't you stick with that before you shift horses right away? And maybe consider that the essence of what you're here for is something much greater than you're imagining right now, and that all that you're imagining is more and more obsessive thinking about your obsessive thinking, which is not uncommon.
Dude, I'm worried I'm joining a cult. Like Harry was like, well, you're in a cult though now. I'm like,
why would you worry about it? You just said you wished it was. What would the worry be?
Because I'm not making money on it. Anytime I'm not making money, I'm like, fuck.
Then I wouldn't come. I would not come here for that. That would be a byproduct of any potential success we could achieve here, not the goal. Just a natural byproduct. And money isn't the end all for anyone. You know, nobody takes it with them. Nobody who's dead has that. So I would say while we're living this life, there may be values considerably greater. And by seeing them, the productivity that's possible would also be naturally occurring in ways that would be well beyond what we needed. And not something we.
Well, yeah. If I was rich like you and had a waterfall, why don't you show us the waterfall in your house? Then maybe. Hey, Jack.
Yes, sir.
What is your blood type?
Obsessive.
Boiling.
Yeah, I'm AB positive, bro. Like, can you know what I mean? It's like, huh? It's like I wish I was Harry and never been to this meeting. Like, this is the only reason I survive is because I'm Anthony. And like the only thing that I have in life is Anthony. This one fucking guy. Right? It's like, oh yeah, you're the good news is you're here, but it's just you, and you have nothing fucking else. What if your mom was right, Jack, and that you are up to something, right? Hello?
So the point and purpose of this discussion is to consider the absolute nature of existence is our absolute
No, what
nature.
I'm saying, what if there is no point? Why do you always have to point? What if we just want to be friends? What if we just want to get to know each other? Why does that have to be the point is?
Well, if you're sincere about that, you would take what I just said and see that that is ultimately the knowing of each other. That is, in fact, the knowing of each other. That is, in fact, the essence of knowing. It is not the essence of thinking. It is the essence of absolute knowing that we know right now that we're discounting by making believe all these excursions are somehow going to find something that isn't here. somewhere else some other time, that there's some other way to do this.
Okay, well, is that
other than
okay?
being
Listen,
where
that's
we
what,
are.
and that's what I want to do, Jack. Listen, what I'm saying is that's what I want. Is that okay? Can you just stop? Like, right? It's like that's what I want. Whatever your show, like, well, imagine if you just spent all this time on a show instead. Like,
you have it. And if we're not talking about it, you're trying to reinforce you don't have it, so you can continue to talk in terms that are obsessed with ideas you have that you think may or may not get you to some point that isn't here. When in fact, here is the
no,
only
I'm just
point.
saying what Gabe is trying to say. I'm just saying that Harry is wondering what this is. Like, Harry is wondering, is there a fee every month? Right? There's
Gabe,
no
is
fee
Anthony
involved.
helping you? Harry didn't ask anything about a fee. Not a word. Gabe, is Anthony helping your clarity, make your ideas clear to Harry?
And remember the jacket that I got your dad. Don't forget that, Gabe.
No, not at current.
Right? Fucking it, right? Listen, Harry, listen, it really is a cold. Right, Jack? What if it was a cult? Can't you start a cult? All this knowledge you have, you can't even do a cult?
It sounds like you've already started one.
I know, but I would like you, imagine if we took your wisdom and we did a cult and we made money from it. And Janet was the president, right? As soon as
I'm not about the money, dude. I'm about vegetables.
Well, I was a vegetable long enough to want to insert some intellect to that vegetative state.
And now he wants you to charge people for it when all we have is gratitude.
I know. Well, listen, hey, listen. It's, you know, I wish I would have thought of this a year or 3 years ago, right? Right? Harry.
Everybody thought of it, Anthony. Everybody thought of it. And what would you buy if you had more money? What do you need? What could you possibly need?
I could help other people. Like, you know what I mean? It's not about.
Why don't you start here, Anthony, rather than helping yourself to the idea that everyone should be thinking about what you're thinking. Start to think about what we may all know collectively right now. This would be a good time to do that, since that's what we come here for, is to actually discuss that from that point of view, where it's absolute rather than even making a point. It's inclusive of all points and all potentials and all possibilities and all people and all things. Maybe that would be the beginning of that thing you're describing. And participating in that might.
What do we call it? What would be better than a cult? What if it's possible, like instead of a cult, it's like something, what would you call that?
Next level.
Life. What would be absolutely unified would be reality, truth. That's what we call it, and that's what we come here to discuss. But you also help make the point, Anthony, of how endemic the whole obsessive thinking is, to think that what we're here to do is obsessively think our way.
No, I'm not here to
something.
make points, Jack. Listen, I'm not making points. I'm like here to ruin things. Okay.
Trust me, I know you're not making any points, but it seems to me you've been trying.
Right. Listen, what I'm saying is that, Harry, I made millions of dollars from Jack's knowledge. It's a cult. If you want millions of dollars in a beach house, you're in the right spot. Is not really happy with your life, still no problems.
I suspect peace of mind is a much different thing than if all the things that are exist and we are a part of them all, then money is somewhat inconsequential to the source of an absolute.
No, everything. Listen, I wake up now, Jack. I'm like, well, listen, I don't even think about anything at work. Like, there's nothing. Like, you know, when you're like struggling and you're trying to make, like, I need this for, it's like, now I wake up, like, I don't even know what exists. I wish I was in a cult. You know, like, can you one. Listen, here's what I'm saying, Jack, can you come up with a cult? Here's your stretch. I need a cult. Like, can you come up with a cult or no?
I'm not interested in that.
Right, that's your stretch, bro. You need to fucking come up. If you just turn this into a cult, we can make millions.
Anthony, what have you been smoking?
Right?
Something's going on. You don't sound, I mean, I know when you're not 100%.
All right, well, I'll just let you guys take it over there.
So welcome, Jana. Anyway, it's good to see you here too.
Thank you.
And where we were with Harry was looking at, with Gabe too, was looking at this idea that if we're committing to imagining that all that's happening is what we think is happening, then we're also committing to imagining that what we're not thinking is that we're thinking is not happening, or that we don't have anything to do with it. And if in fact we are simply imagining that, and then because we're wrong trying to make it right by only seeing that, there again is another induced mental state that's created to try to compensate for something that's wrong being thought of as right. And it's certainly something we can do. And I know, to Anthony's point, when my mother used to say, "You're up to something," I hear that same voice in my head when I experience the conflicts and where I find it most now is the thoughts I have about other people that are spiteful and hateful and try to reduce them. When I feel myself thinking about people in contemptful ways, I know that I'm up to something. Because what I'm trying to do is escape the responsibility for something I am doing that has me feeling condemned, but I want to make believe has nothing to do with me. And so I start seeing it in others. And rather than see them as the blame and fault and guilt of that, I begin to thank them in my thinking for offering me that opportunity to notice it and use them, take advantage of them as a form of perspective, like I might thank a mirror for mentioning that I have toothpaste all over my cheeks and say, "Oh, I didn't notice that." But the mirror actually gives me a chance to see with perspective what I can't always see. I can feel it maybe, but not know what it is. But the visual ability to see things is very important to our human dynamic. To see things that can't be seen is what understanding is about. If my understanding
you were selling subscriptions to the paper that really you didn't, you were selling subscriptions that didn't exist.
So today, right now, if I think my thinking is reality, I think that misunderstanding is also understanding. And I think that misperception is my only perception. And I use those words as though they're correct when in fact they're incorrect because I've reversed everything. The idea of a lie means that everything ends up reversed. So understanding becomes misunderstanding. And who I am becomes what I think. And all I am becomes only what I think. And I become very susceptible because I promote an image, not in fact any substance, because it's all about image. It's all about how do I look? What do I have? How do I appear to other people? How do they think of me? And if who I am are not those things, and I know that, then those things become clear when I'm doing them. They don't become less disturbing, they become more obviously disturbing. And I have a chance to begin to notice that I am up to something I don't even think I'm doing, and begin to address the underlying nature of my nature as something that is occurring. And I'm noticing the effects that are giving me a clear view of the source of that problem, which is thinking.
Right, and let's say hypothetically you're wrong. Does it change anything? Let's say you're totally wrong, and everything you said was. Does it?
I'm just sharing my experience, Anthony. I'm not telling
you. I know,
you
but let's say you're totally wrong. Does it change anything?
Anthony, you get to decide what that means to you. That's your choice. If you want it to be wrong, then operate on that opposite basis and see how it goes. So when you make that decision, I don't make those decisions for you. I don't make those choices for you. And if that's what you want to investigate, I would say go and do that and continue to do that. It sounds like that's what you're doing today. Investigating all sorts of ideas that really have very little to do with what we're talking about and everything to do with what you're thinking about.
Let me ask you a question. Who knows more about this subject, me or you?
I would say we all know absolutely everything that we know. And the thinking about it is what we're struggling with. It's not It's not reality that we're struggling with any more than it's life that we're struggling with. It's what we're thinking about reality.
So Harry doesn't
life.
know more than you. You know exactly what Harry knows.
In terms of the absolute nature of omnipotence and omnipresence, and yes, in an indivisible source of knowing awareness, yes, absolutely. And Anthony, surprisingly, even to you, that includes you. So if you have that knowingness and you act as though all you know is what you think, then you're actually minimizing your capacity to function while you're claiming over and over again that you're interested in maximizing it, which I would say is a natural inherent conflict and is an obvious contradiction to what you're claiming.
And here's the spoiler alert.
I'm not saying don't do it. What's that?
The spoiler alert is that nothing matters. Like whatever you're like, oh, well, the good news is you figured everything out. Spoiler, nothing. Like, what is the most important thing to you in the world, Katie?
What's your motivation? What's your motivation for your drive today? If nothing matters,
I don't have any motivation.
Why is your mouth working then? Why are your thoughts expressing themselves through your mouth if you have no motivation? Is that just happening? Is there a recording going on? Is that an automated system that's happening? So Harry, one of the reasons this discussion developed was because, as you know, you and I had conversations together for quite some time. I don't remember how many times, but when you were originally talked to me, it was probably a half a dozen or more. Just checking in and sort of monitoring what was going on, because I remember you said that you got to the hospital and they couldn't do anything. They had no suggestion for you to help. But doing this more publicly also shows how, as the numbers increase, the potential for volatility becomes greater. Right? In the isolation of a conversation one-on-one, we both know where we're going. We can both speak, interrupt, interfere, whatever. But it isn't much greater than that. But we live in an environment where there's all kinds of people that we're dealing with all the time. And my experience has been that as I began to speak as honestly as I could about this, I began to connect with people in a way that was very different than I used to connect with them. And that's something Gabe and I were talking about yesterday in relation to seeing how much small talk there is and how many kind of natural things that people, how are you? Fine. Everybody's fine. Well, I don't see everybody fine. We have suicide at an all-time high today. I wouldn't say everything's fine. So speaking honestly actually begins to reinforce and confirm how accurate we are in our new alignment, if it's new, with reality, to start to actually notice that being aligned to reality actually is like learning to walk on a tightrope and learning to do any trick that you've never done, or learning how to throw a football, or learning how to play tennis or basketball. Every one of those, the best basketball players are constantly practicing. And so our practice is the implementation and the discussion of this wherever we go, not to simply tell people what we're thinking that might seem, I do that and sort of like people can look sideways for a minute, but then aspects of it connect and we get a little bit of traction, and I kind of leave them with that. Because my interest is actually in doing what I can to align with what's happening in the best way I can, and to continue to talk about those things, to engage other people on that basis. And what you did here with me last week, I know has impacted people who have listened to that recording and benefited them to whatever degree they've chosen to actually see that and notice that that may be their experience too, or a piece of their experience, and maybe looking at it a little more honestly or accurately would do them some good, or maybe actually stabilize that sense of instability or that fractured sense of state, that state of mind, fractured state of mind that they may be experiencing. So it helps confirm those things for people. So,
hey, Jack, let me just say that you saved I don't want to be like the guy that's a jerk. This guy, Jack, saved my life. Like the only reason I'm still here is because of Jack. So I just like to challenge him
But I'm
because
not a
I'm a dick.
Tupperware salesman, Anthony. It's your choices that you have made in relation to this, to whatever degree they have been, that made that difference. Those weren't things.
No, don't tell me. Listen, what I'm saying is destiny for like. Don't tell me. Shannon just texted me. So Harry, can you tell us what's going on? Because that's the problem. We're doing all the discussion. Just tell us where you're at, Harry.
What's going on? What?
How old are you? Like 18, 19?
I wish.
Tell us what's going on. Why are you here?
Anthony,
Jack and
before Anthony, you might want to listen back through the 40 minutes you missed. Harry, and also the recording that Harry and I did last week. Harry very easily and very comfortably described his situation and what he was thinking and what he was going through, including today.
You think Harry knows what he's going through? Harry has no clue. Right, Harry? Do you know even what you're going through right now?
I think so, yeah.
But tell us, what are you going through?
He already did, Anthony, you loser. Stop it.
Well, can you tell me one more time, Harry?
Anthony, re-listen to this because we're coming up against the end of our time together today. You can go back and listen to Harry, both, as I said, on the recording I did with him, and you can go back and listen to the beginning of this that you missed. I found Harry is not in sobriety. Most of the people that we have been in this discussion are sober, so they've had some experience at this transition to a spiritual awakening, and this idea that a contemplative daily awakening isn't just in meditation and isn't just at some special time during the day, but is a 24-hour day state of mind. It's a state of awareness, a state of absolute certainty about that awareness, and that it's always available to our thinking, regardless of what we think. Now, Harry doesn't come from that lineage and history, and yet has been as clear as anyone I've ever dealt with about his experience, because it was severe, and he faced it and started dealing with it and started doing things. He has a daughter that he loves and wanted to take care of, and he knew that he had a place here that he didn't want to kill himself over. He knew there was some value in him staying, and he's come a long way from the early days that I spoke to him. And so I want to foster that awareness. And one of the points I got to earlier with you, Harry, was that if these ideas we have that make us feel better are basically increasing the bubble, at some point we're going to get to those limits and feel the same discomfort and all over again. And if you can begin to notice and are willing to, as you do, that beyond that bubble is also everything else. It's never the end of anything, it's the beginning of everything. And that within an infinite realm, there are no limits whatsoever. And if that infinite realm is our realm, if that's our essence, then there really isn't any bubble, only other than the thinking we're doing about it being a bubble. We're thinking about it in those terms because it gives us a narrative to put a picture to it, to describe how we're thinking, what we're doing, these isolated thoughts we have that have no basis. Those thoughts are easy to have. It's easy to have wrong thoughts. It's when I think they're right that I start walking into a confrontation that I can't win, a fight that I can't win. So it isn't the wrong thoughts that are wrong.
Jack, Harry doesn't have a waterfall at his house. They live at the beach, bro. Like, let's let Harry talk. What's going on, Harry? Tell us what's happening.
Anthony, once again, I want you to re-listen to this because Harry did a considerable amount of talking. Am I right, Gabe? Am I completely off here?
No, you're not off, Jack, but some of us don't have a Ferrari and live in France either. So
no, we all do it. No, see, here's where you're wrong. We all have it, bro. Right?
So anyway, we're going to sign off. I appreciate you guys being here today. Harry, thank you for coming for the first time in this conversation. As I said, as it gets bigger, as more voices come in, you can get a bigger experience of what you tend to face during the day with other people, which can be challenging at points. And my experience is those challenges are what help me begin to notice my limits in my thinking. Because I have certain ideas of how things should go, and when they don't go that way, it makes clear that I have limited thoughts that I'm in conflict with, not what's actually happening. What's actually happening is a chance to notice those limitations, a chance to begin to actually say, oh, here's another opportunity I'm getting as a result of something not going where I thought it might or should or could. So anyway, what's that?
Okay, Jack, can we let Harry sum it up though? Like give him a minute of time?
I would say that's up to Harry.
Yeah, go ahead. Like, I don't want to hear you like you're always like, let's hear Harry talk and like, let's hear what he has to say.
I've been talking for a bit, but yeah, but it's actually I really like being in this conversation. You know, just sharing my experience. I went through a lot, and then here I am. You know, just getting better every day.
Is it possible you could tell more than that though? I want to hear more about. I'm sorry, I didn't hear you. Can you?
Third or fourth time now, re-listen to the recording I did with Harry. Re-listen to the beginning of this recording that you didn't listen to, and now we're trying to infill. And just notice your involvement. Notice how you participate in these things. So what I'm here to do is not reinforce. I don't want to try to reinforce obsessive thoughts and stories and compulsivity and impulsivity. I'm not here to do that.
Why not?
I'm here to. Well, because you've got your whole day to do that. You do that very well during your whole day. You do not need me to help you in that regard. You're a master at that, as I am. So what I'm looking to learn is to be better at focusing on absolute principles in my discussion so that I take them into my day and become more productive in the relations I have rather than reactive to thinking I need to have them do what I think they should be doing rather than simply experience what they're doing and sharing my experience.
Right, and maybe that's the problem. What I'm saying is that maybe that could be a problem.
I would say you would be absolutely right, Anthony.
Right, but listen, I don't know. Listen, it's not about me saying this. I'm saying Harry is like this guy that I could do. Harry, what was your favorite cartoon in the 70s?
So, Anthony, once again, we're at the end of this. If you want to listen to Harry, listen back through the.
Is it possible we could go another 10 minutes, Jack?
Not today.
Why?
Yeah, it's possible, but we're not going to.
Why?
Because I don't want to get into, first of all, I do not want to get into a repetitive cycle that just goes on and loops and loops and loops. So I'm not interested in doing that, Anthony. We actually covered some ground that I thought was valuable. My experience was it was valuable. It included everybody saying what they wanted when they wanted to say it, not demanding of them anything, but simply asking and letting them do what they wanted.
Let Harry, is it possible to let Harry wrap this up?
He's already done it.
Is it possible to give him a few minutes? What I'm saying is that I don't think that you're giving Harry enough time.
Anthony, I think it's not enough time for you. And speaking for your speaking, I would say what you're thinking about Harry is what you were thinking about your experience, that you do not want to be responsible. So you want him to be responsible for it, to fix and help you do what you're unwilling to do. So I'm going to leave it on that note and thank you for your participation today, each and every one. And carry on.
Thank you, Jack. Have a great day.
Thanks, Jack. Talk soon.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
John,
Thank
good
you.
to see you. Thanks.
Yeah, nice seeing you guys.
Love you guys.